The clerk said there was only one room left in Las Vegas at the exact moment I saw the man with the silver tie pin step through the revolving doors. I had Adrian Vale's blood on the inside of my cuff, a flash drive taped under my bra, and maybe 3 seconds before the people who killed him realized he had handed his evidence to me instead of dying with it. I turned toward the elevators. A warm, heavy hand closed around mine before I made it 2 steps. Frank Marino bent his head until his mouth was at my ear, his voice low enough that only I could hear it over the lobby piano and the chatter of fight weekend gamblers. "You belong beside me tonight." In any other hotel, the words would have sounded like ownership. At the St. Aurelia, with a dead auditor cooling in a service corridor upstairs, and a killer pretending to check in behind me, they sounded like the only reason I was going to live long enough to see morning. I went still, not because I trusted him, because every person in that lobby knew who Frank Marino was, and when a man like that took your hand in public, no one else was stupid enough to try taking you away from him unless they were ready to start a war in marble and crystal. The front desk clerk stopped mid-keystroke. Her eyes flicked from me to Frank, and then down, the way everyone's eyes did around him once they had looked too long. "Mr. Marino," she said carefully, "we truly only have one room left. The system outage from the weigh-in after-party and the convention overflow." "I heard you the first time," Frank said without looking at her. His fingers tightened once around mine. Not painful, firm. A signal, play along. Or maybe he didn't need me to understand that. Maybe it was already written on my face, on the blood I'd missed at my cuff, on the panic I could feel sweating cold at the base of my spine. The man with the silver tie pin was closer now, mid-30s, clean haircut, expensive shoes, the kind of face you forgot the second it turned away, professional forgettability. He was the one who had passed Adrian in the corridor 10 minutes before Adrian stumbled into me near the employee elevators with his hand over the red stain blooming through his shirt. "Take this," Adrian had whispered, shoving the drive into my palm so hard my fingers still hurt from the shape of it. Not police, not anyone in the hotel. Marino. Then he had sagged against the wall and slid down it like someone had pulled the bones out of him. I had never seen a man die before. I had never seen one look relieved while he did it. The clerk swallowed. "The final room is a 1-bedroom executive suite on the 32nd floor. "Perfect," Frank said. I finally looked at him. He was taller than he seemed in newspapers, and heavier than he looked in old surveillance stills. Not soft, not loose, broad, dense, built like a man who carried weight and had stopped apologizing for it. His suit was black, open at the collar, expensive without trying to prove it. Dark hair combed back. A floral tattoo rose from the side of his neck, disappearing under white cotton. Another shadow of ink showed at his chest where the shirt had come undone at the throat. There was a scar near his jaw. I hadn't noticed the first time I met him. And his eyes were what made men step aside, not because they were cold, because they were awake, because they missed nothing. "Put it on my account," he told the clerk, "and send up food." The silver tie pin had stopped walking. He was standing near the concierge desk now, pretending to scroll through his phone while angling his body toward us. Frank's thumb brushed once over my knuckles. I don't know why that nearly undid me more than the blood had. Maybe because it was so calm. Maybe because it was the first gentle thing that had happened in the worst 15 minutes of my life. The clerk slid over a key packet. Frank picked it up with his free hand, then turned me toward the private elevator bank reserved for penthouse and gaming-level guests. "Smile," he murmured. I looked up at him, furious and frightened all at once. "Are you insane?" His mouth barely moved. "Probably. Smile anyway." The private elevator doors opened on silent tracks. A guard inside stepped aside the second he saw Frank. I forced my face into something that might pass for composure and let Frank lead me in. The silver tie pin moved then, fast enough to matter. He took 3 steps toward us. Frank turned his head just enough for the lobby cameras to catch the line of his face. Then he did something worse than threatening. He smiled, not warmly, not pleasantly. Like a man who knew exactly who else had entered the room and wanted that man to understand he'd been seen. The silver tie pin stopped. The elevator doors slid shut. The second they sealed, I tore my hand back. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Frank hit the button for the 32nd floor and glanced at the security camera dome above us. Then he stepped close enough that his shoulder blocked the lens's view of my face. "What's wrong with me?" he said quietly. "Is that if I had let you walk to those elevators alone, you would have disappeared before the doors opened." I stared at him. The elevator rose smooth and fast. My pulse didn't. "You don't know me." "No," he said, "but Adrian Vale did, and Adrian died trying to put something in your hands instead of mine. That makes you my problem tonight." The word problem made my temper flare through the fear. "I'm not your anything." His gaze dropped to the blood at my cuff. "Then open the elevator and go back down. Test the theory." I looked at the emergency stop panel, the gleaming buttons, the reflected gold walls. Then I looked at him again. He was breathing a little heavier than he should have been for a stationary man in an elevator, but nothing else about him suggested strain. He stood with his weight balanced slightly to one side. Not quite a limp, not quite not. Old injury, I thought automatically, or pain. The sort of detail my brain noticed when I was scared, as if cataloging weakness in other people could save me from my own. The elevator chimed. 32. The doors opened into a private vestibule, cream walls, black marble, silk runner, no other doors visible from the elevator bank. Frank didn't touch me this time. He only gestured toward the suite ahead of us. Inside. I should have refused on principle. I should have gone for the staircase, the service route, the fire exit. Instead, I walked. Because a man was dead. Because Adrian had chosen this name with his last breath. Because I had been auditing ghost rooms and vanished invoices for 10 miserable days. And somehow that had dragged me into the orbit of the one man in Las Vegas, whose shadow could cover an entire city block. Frank opened the suite and let me enter first. I stopped 3 steps in. It wasn't one room, technically. It was a luxury suite the size of my apartment, and the next one over, all dark wood and smoked mirrors and windows facing the strip, like a row of sharpened diamonds. There was a bedroom off to the right. A sitting room with low lamps, a dining nook, a wet bar, 2 bathrooms, and a terrace beyond the glass. Still only one room left. Still only one safe place in a city that had just tried to swallow me whole. Frank closed the door, slid the deadbolt, then crossed to the hallway console and punched 4 numbers into a security panel by the entry. Now, he said, turning to face me. Show me what Adrian gave you. I stared at him. You first. One dark eyebrow lifted. You're negotiating? I'm still breathing. That did something to his face. Not a smile. Not yet. Something smaller and more dangerous. Approval, maybe. Fair, he said. He reached inside his jacket slowly, giving me enough time to flinch if I wanted to, and pulled out a compact pistol. Matte black. Heavy. He set it on the bar between us. Then he removed a second from the small of his back and placed it beside the first. No surprises, he said. The room hummed with the low sound of air conditioning and city lights beyond glass. My own breathing sounded too loud. I reached under the neckline of my dress with shaking fingers, peeled the flash drive free from the tape, and held it up. Frank's eyes narrowed fractionally. Adrian trusted you a lot for a woman he met 11 days ago. I met him 8 months ago, I said. He asked for me by name when St. Aurelia's insurer needed a forensic auditor who understood hospitality fraud, occupancy systems, and state gaming compliance. Recognition flickered there. Mariam Qureshi. I hated the way my name sounded in his voice. Not because he said it badly, because he said it like he'd already been thinking it. You know my name. I make a habit of knowing the names of people looking through my books. Your books? My laugh came out sharp. 1 man died over a flash drive from your hotel, Mr. Marino. I'm not sure I'd brag about the bookkeeping. Frank's jaw tightened, but he didn't snap. Adrian wasn't working for me. Right, he wasn't, Frank repeated, more quietly now. Which is the problem. I didn't move. Then the suite phone rang. The sound hit me like a gunshot. I jerked. Frank didn't. He picked up on the second ring, eyes still on mine. Yeah, a pause. Send it. He hung up and nodded toward the seating area. Sit down, Mariam. I folded my arms. No. A knock came at the outer vestibule door. Not the suite itself, the private service entrance. Frank keyed the panel again. The outer latch clicked. A woman stepped in. Tall, severe, dark hair braided down her back, gun holstered under a fitted jacket. She saw me first, then the drive in my hand. Then the blood. Jesus, she said. She's the auditor. Rosa, Frank said. This is Mariam. Mariam, Rosa Vega. Rosa's gaze sharpened. You should sit. I'm fine. No, Frank said. You're in shock. I said I'm fine. Rosa's mouth twitched like she'd heard that lie from too many wounded people to count. She carried in a medical kit and set it on the table. Fine as bleeding in my hallway now? I looked down. More of Adrian's blood than mine. My stomach rolled. The room tilted just slightly. Frank moved faster than a man his size should have been able to. 1 second he was across the room. The next, a steadying hand was at my elbow and another at the back of my chair as he guided me down. Breathe, he said. I hated that I did what he told me. I hated that it helped. Rosa crouched in front of me with the kit. Is any of that yours? No. Good. Don't faint. I'm on my feet too much already. A laugh almost escaped me, broken in the middle by a shudder. Frank was still standing close enough that I could feel heat through his suit. Not touching now, just there. Rosa handed me a clean towel for the cuff. Talk. Frank looked at me. Start at the beginning. So I did, because the beginning now felt like another lifetime, and because if I stopped moving my mouth, I thought I might stop holding myself together. I told them about the boardroom on my second day at St. Aurelia, when Frank Marino walked in 20 minutes late to a meeting he was supposedly hosting, and every executive in the room forgot how to hold a pen. I told them how he'd listened in silence while my boss Adrian gave polished slides about deferred maintenance and claim adjustments, and how I had interrupted to say the numbers were lying. Not a small lie, an engineered one. 27 room nights had been billed in the previous quarter to suites that did not exist anymore. Insurance recoveries had been filed on damage in spaces converted years ago. Payroll shadow accounts were being paid through banquet, housekeeping, and private gaming budgets. Someone was washing money through hospitality data, because hotel books were the one place in Vegas where chaos looked normal if you spread it across enough departments. I told them how Adrian had seemed more interested than alarmed, how Frank had stared at me for a full 2 seconds before asking, "Can you prove that?" and how I had answered, "Give me 10 days. I told them about the following week: 12-hour audit days, back-end access, blocked service logs, security blackouts on floors the hotel map said were empty. Adrian had become jumpy. He'd stopped replying on official email, started calling me from disposable numbers. This afternoon, he asked me to attend the Terrazza Ballroom Donor Gala, said he had found something too sensitive to discuss in his office. He met me outside the service corridor behind the ballroom, pale and sweating, pressed the drive into my hand, and said if anything happened to him, I had to get it to Marino. Then he heard footsteps. Then he looked at me like it was already too late. Then he died. When I finished, the room was so still that even the city outside felt paused. Frank sat finally, slowly, in the armchair opposite me. The suit jacket strained across his shoulders. The chair looked smaller under him, like furniture often did in his company. He rubbed once at the side of his neck beneath the tattoo, and for the first time I saw something that looked like anger not aimed at me. Rosa broke the silence. "Why didn't you call the police?" I laughed again. This time there was nothing funny in it. "I audit casinos for a living," I said. "I'm not stupid." That got Rosa's respect faster than anything else could have. Frank held out his hand. "Drive." I looked at his palm, broad and scarred in small places a rich man's hand shouldn't be. He waited without pushing. Finally, I leaned forward and placed the drive in it. He didn't pocket it. He handed it to Rosa. "Clone it," he said. Rosa nodded, took it to the desk, and started setting up a laptop from a black case I hadn't noticed before. I looked at Frank. "Why would Adrian tell me to bring it to you if he wasn't working for you?" Frank's face gave little away. "Because he wanted me to know who was stealing from me, which means the drive probably named someone inside my house." The word house sounded larger than a family and smaller than an empire. I pressed the towel harder into my cuff just to have something to do with my hands. "Do you know who killed him?" "No." "You sound sure." "I'm sure of what I don't know." It's what keeps me alive. The answer should have annoyed me. Instead, it landed somewhere else entirely, somewhere that recognized precision and respected it against my will. Rosa looked up from the laptop. "Encrypted." Frank didn't blink. "Can you break it?" "Eventually." I stood. Frank's gaze snapped to mine. "Where are you going?" "Bathroom. To wash blood off my arm so I can decide if I'm staying in a room with a Mafia boss or jumping off the terrace." Rosa gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. Frank rose more slowly. "Down the hall on the left." I took 2 steps, then stopped and turned. "If I go in there," I said, "am I coming back out to locked doors?" His expression didn't change. "No." "And if I decide to leave?" "You can." "Will you stop me?" A beat. "No," he said. I held his gaze long enough to see whether he meant it. I still didn't know, but I went anyway. The bathroom was bigger than the apartment I rented for Sammy and me in Spring Valley after our mother died. Marble counters, rain shower, towels folded like geometry. I stared at my reflection for a long moment before I turned the tap on. There was blood on my cuff, on the inside of my wrist, a fine speck of it near my jaw. Adrian's life reduced to stains and a piece of plastic. I scrubbed until my skin flushed red. Then I leaned on the counter, closed my eyes, and finally let the shaking come. Not crying. That would have been cleaner. This was worse. My body emptying terror through my bones while my brain still tried to make sense of occupancy reports and gunmen and Frank Marino's hand around mine in the lobby. "You belong beside me tonight." I should have hated the sentence. Maybe I did. Maybe I hated how much safer I had felt the second he said it. When I walked back into the sitting room, Rosa had one laptop open and a second drive connected to a cloning dock. Frank had taken off his jacket and loosened another button at his throat. Without it, he looked less polished and more dangerous. The floral tattoo along his neck curved down toward his collarbone. He was on the phone, speaking so quietly, I caught only fragments. "No one in or out of the Aurelia without my say. Lock 19. No, not police. Not yet. Find the man with the silver tie pin." He hung up and looked at me. "Hungry?" The question landed so absurdly in the middle of everything that I stared at him. "What? You haven't eaten," he said. "That's your read?" "It's obvious." "How?" "Your hands are shaking from adrenaline and low blood sugar at the same time." Rosa, still typing, said, "Told you." I ignored her. "I'm not hungry." Frank picked up the sweet phone and ordered anyway. Soup, bread, tea. Then he sat back down like he hadn't just overridden me to my face. I should have been furious. Instead, I said, "You do that a lot? Do what?" "Act like a command is a kindness." His gaze rested on me for a long moment. "Only when someone is too scared to choose what's good for them." That answer sounded better in your head. A corner of his mouth moved, probably. The soup arrived in 20 minutes under armed escort. I wish that had been a joke. By the time I took the first spoonful, Rosa had the drive open. She said nothing for several seconds, which was the first thing that really frightened Frank. He rose without a word and crossed to the desk. I followed. On screen were folders nested inside innocuous banquet and housekeeping files. One labeled 1907, another Aurelia Legacy, another DV Paymaster, images, spreadsheets, scanned signatures, internal email chains. Rosa opened the first spreadsheet. Room charges, escort payments disguised as minibar replenishment, private security invoices mapped to non-existent suites, insurance claims filed on phantom electrical faults, cash transfers from shell companies tied to city licensing board members and one state senator who liked to talk about moral renewal on television. I felt my stomach tighten. "This isn't skimming," I said. "This is architecture." Frank's voice dropped. "Keep going." Rosa opened a hidden subfolder within 1907. Still photographs filled the screen. I stopped breathing. Not blackmail in the usual sense, not sex tapes or politicians doing lines. Worse, room interiors, women, men, bruises, passport photos, arrival and departure timestamps, a holding suite disguised inside hotel inventory, hidden from public room maps, used to move human beings like luggage during sold-out weekends when no one asked why the elevators were always full. The soup turned to acid in my stomach. Frank went so still beside me that the room itself seemed to tense around him. I whispered, "Adrian died over this." "No," Frank said, voice rougher now. "Adrian died because he knew who was running it." Rosa clicked open the last file. A scanned ledger from 15 years earlier appeared. A room number, 1907. Fire incident report. Electrical malfunction. Fatality. Lucia Marino. I looked at Frank. He didn't blink, but something in his face had changed in a way that made me step back without meaning to. Not rage. Not yet. Something older. And a wound opening under the suit and the tattoos and the name people lowered their voices around. "My sister," he said. The two words fell flat and heavy. "She died at the Aurelia," Rosa said quietly, not looking at me. "Officially in a fire. Unofficially, we never found the truth." Frank's eyes stayed on the screen. I thought back to the phantom claims. The old code, the legacy folder. They weren't just stealing now. They had been using the same hidden room, the same accounting shadows, the same infrastructure for 15 years, maybe longer. "This isn't your house turning on you," I said slowly. "This is someone inheriting an old system." Frank finally turned his head toward me. "Say it cleaner." I swallowed. "The person running this didn't build it after you took over. They took over something that was already there." Rosa's fingers stilled above the keyboard. Frank's gaze sharpened like a blade catching light. "And?" I forced myself to think through the nausea. Who had the authority to preserve legacy room coding during the transition from the old ownership software? I asked. Who would understand both historic fire files and present-day revenue masking? Who had access before you controlled the property and after? Frank didn't answer. He didn't need to, because in the silence between us, and one name stepped into the room all by itself. Eddie Marino, Frank's half-brother, executive vice president of Marino Hospitality, public face of the family's legitimate empire, the polished one, the one who went on camera in tailored suits and talked about urban renewal. While Frank stood behind the curtain, men feared more than they respected. I didn't know him personally, but I knew his type from every boardroom in every hotel I had ever audited. The man who weaponized being underestimated. Rosa said it first. "If it's Eddie," Frank cut her off. "No names. Until proof." His voice was back under control now, which somehow scared me more. Whatever crack I had glimpsed around Lucia's file was gone. He had boarded it up and weaponized the nails. He looked at me. "You were right in the boardroom." I blinked. "What? You said the books were lying." His eyes held mine. They were. I had no idea why that was the moment my pulse started misbehaving. But it was. Maybe because most men only listened to women long enough to decide whether to dismiss them. Maybe because he had remembered the exact line. Rosa broke the tension. Adrian created a dead man switch. She clicked another file. An email draft opened with a timed release matrix. Gaming control. State Insurance Fraud Unit, 3 reporters, 1 federal anti-trafficking contact. The timer had been disabled manually at 8:43 p.m. Adrian had meant to release everything if he didn't check in. Someone stopped it after stabbing him. I checked my watch. 11:16. He knew he was going to die, I whispered. No, Frank said. He knew he might. The suite went quiet again. Then Rosa said, "We have maybe a few hours before whoever killed him realizes the drive never made it into their hands." I looked from the files to Frank. "Which means they'll come here." Rosa gave me a new look then. Less civilian, more participant, probably. I was tired, terrified, furious, and in a room 3 stories above common sense, with a man whose sister had burned in the same ghost room now being used to move women and launder public money. I should have run while I still believed that was possible. Instead, I said, "Then let's make sure whoever comes finds the wrong room." Frank's gaze settled on me, unreadable. Then, very quietly, he said, "There she is." I frowned. "Who?" "The woman Adrian trusted instead of me." The words hit somewhere deeper than they should have. Rosa stood. "I'll move the files and set a mirror image on the suite network." Frank nodded. "And put 2 men outside the hall, but not on the cameras. I don't want Eddie spooked before I know how far down this goes." Rosa left. I was alone with him. Again. The suite had gotten smaller in her absence. Frank moved to the bar, poured water into 2 glasses, and handed me one. I took it because my hand needed something to hold that wasn't itself. He leaned a hip against the counter, the pose almost casual if not for the hard line of his jaw. "You should sleep." I laughed without humor. "Did you miss the part where a man died in front of me?" "No." "Then what kind of psychopath suggests sleep?" "The kind who knows panic turns people stupid by sunrise." I should have hated him for that. Instead, I drank the water. "Where are you sleeping?" "I'm not." "That's not what I asked." He looked toward the bedroom. "You take the room." "And you?" "The chair." "Because you think I'll scream if you take the bed?" He held my gaze. "Because I said you'd be safe here, and I don't break my word in the first 12 hours. The answer left nowhere easy to stand. I looked away first. "There are 2 couches. I've slept on worse." I believed him instantly. That annoyed me too. I set the glass down. "Do you ever stop deciding what the room should feel like?" "Yes." "When?" "When I'm wrong." "Are you wrong now?" He thought about it. "No." For the first time all night, something like real amusement moved in my chest. It didn't quite make it to a smile, but it came close enough that he noticed. His eyes changed. Not softened, focused, as if my almost smile mattered more than the drive, the dead auditor, the ghost suite, and the fact that his own brother's name might be bleeding through all of it. I hated that I noticed that too. The bedroom door locked from the inside. I tested it twice, then stood in the dark room under the strip lights bleeding through the curtains, and tried to remember the last safe place I had ever slept. There wasn't one. There were apartments with overdue notices, motel rooms after my father's accident, hospital chairs beside my mother, shared leases, coffees gone cold at 2 in the morning over spreadsheets and chargeback fraud and unpaid utilities. Safe was a story rich people told. I changed into the oversized t-shirt and silk drawstring pants someone had placed on the bed. Hotel logo on the breast pocket. Tags already removed. Exactly my size. That should have frightened me. Instead, it made my throat ache. When I lay down, I expected the adrenaline to keep me wide awake. It did, for almost an hour. Then exhaustion came over the top like a wave and pulled me under. I woke to a sound I knew too well. Silence. Not ordinary quiet, the kind that means something in the air has changed. I sat up in the dark. The bedside clock said 3:07. No footsteps in the suite, no city hum from the hall, just the low drone of HVAC and the deep wrongness of stillness beyond a locked door. I slid out of bed and moved toward the crack beneath it. A shadow crossed, then another. Male voices, too low to parse. I didn't think. I grabbed the room phone and hit the line Frank had shown me when I wasn't paying enough attention to care. It rang once. He picked up instantly. "Yeah, there are people outside the bedroom door." A beat. Then his voice dropped into something colder than panic. "Stay where you are." I backed toward the bed. Outside, something hit the suite door hard enough to rattle the frame. Men shouted. A gunshot cracked, muffled by distance and walls. Then Frank's voice. Not in the phone now, but from the main room. Quiet and lethal. "Wrong suite. 3 more shots." Glass shattered. The phone line went dead. I stood in the dark with my pulse trying to climb out of my throat, and the brutal understanding that the attack had come faster than Rosa predicted. Someone out there knew enough to move by 3 in the morning. The bedroom handle stayed still. No one tried my door. After maybe 30 seconds, or 5 years, the suite went silent again. Then a knock. 3 spaced taps. "Miriam," Frank's voice. "Open." I unlocked the door with fingers that didn't feel attached to me. Frank stood there in the hall light with his white shirt open at the throat, jacket gone. a gun down at his thigh. There was blood on his sleeve and a shallow cut near his cheekbone I knew hadn't been there earlier. I looked over his shoulder. One of the decorative entry mirrors in the suite had shattered. A lamp was down. The carpet near the vestibule was streaked with red where someone had been dragged or crawled. Rosa stood by the door, already on another call, her face hard as winter. Frank saw my eyes tracking the blood. "Not mine," he said. Helpful. Something flashed in his expression at that. Approval again. I was beginning to resent how much of it I wanted. "Come out," he said. I stepped into the suite. One of his men was on a knee near the service vestibule holding pressure to his shoulder. Another lay handcuffed face down between the couches, mask half torn off, blood coming from his nose in a slow, ugly line. The silver tie pin. He had made it upstairs after all. Rosa ended the call. "He's alive, barely worth the trouble." Frank walked to the man on the floor and crouched with a slowness that suggested either enormous control or old pain. "Maybe both. Who sent you?" The man spat blood onto the carpet. Frank didn't react. Wrong answer. His voice never got louder than it had been in the lobby. The man laughed once. Thin, wet. "You're slipping, Marino." Frank's gaze didn't flicker. Maybe. He glanced back at Rosa. "Search him." Rosa went through pockets with practiced speed. Burner phone. Room key card. Cash. No ID. Then she found a folded card and handed it over. Frank opened it. Looked once, handed it to me. I almost didn't take it. Then I did. It was a banquet linen order form, except the initials at the bottom weren't housekeeper or supervisor marks. EM. My heartbeat changed its shape. Frank watched my face. "Still think it's coincidence?" "No." The word came out steadier than I felt. He rose. Good. Then he turned to Rosa. "Move her." I looked up sharply. "Move me where?" "Somewhere Eddie doesn't know." "This is your hotel." "Exactly." I should have argued. Instead, I looked at the shattered mirror, the blood, the tie pin, and asked, "How long do I have?" 7 minutes. Rosa was already pulling a duffel from the closet. "No." I stepped between her and the bedroom. Frank's attention snapped back to me. "Mariam, I'm not being packed. You're being relocated." Same thing said with more money. The cut on his cheek had started bleeding again, thin and dark. I couldn't stop looking at it. "If I disappear now," I said, "Eddie will know the drive got out. He'll wipe everything before dawn." Frank stared at me like he was deciding whether to shake sense into me or respect it. "Which is why you're not going to a safe house," I continued, words coming faster now, steadier. "You're going somewhere visible. Somewhere public enough that moving on you creates witnesses. Somewhere Eddie thinks is theater, not strategy." Rosa stopped moving. Frank didn't blink. "Keep going." I thought of the occupancy charts, the fight weekend overflow, every suite on the strip sold, every paparazzo and gambler and hanger-on searching for a glimpse of money. Then I thought of the one place visibility could act like armor. "The Belle-Mare," I said. Rosa's brows went up. "His rival hates him." "Which is why Eddie will think Frank won't go there," I said. "It's public. It's humiliating. It makes no strategic sense." I looked at Frank. "Which means it's perfect." For the first time that night, he looked almost startled, then his mouth curved. Not much, but enough to make me suddenly aware of exactly how dangerous it was when a man like him actually smiled. "There she is," he said again, quieter this time. I crossed my arms to hide the fact that my hands were shaking. "Stop saying that." He took one step closer. "Why?" "Because I don't know what it means." His eyes held mine for a beat too long. "Neither do I," he said. At 3:31 in the morning, I left the St. Aurelia wearing borrowed cashmere, my laptop bag, and Frank Marino's whirled around me like a moving wall. He took the front entrance, not the basement, not the garage. He walked me through the lobby in full view of the night desk, the security cameras, the blackout curtain gamblers still feeding machines near the bar because Vegas never respected the hour, and the man from TMZ half asleep on a velvet chair who came instantly awake at the sight of us. I should have yanked my hand back. Instead, I let Frank keep it. Because every eye on us said the same thing. Untouchable. Because there is safety in spectacle if you know how to use it. The Belle-Mare, his so-called rival's flagship property, had a private arrangement with him older than the public feud, and better protected than any alliance with a signature on it. That was something Rosa explained in the car, while Frank sat beside me on a call moving pieces I didn't understand fast enough to be useful with. The Belle-Mare suite turned out to be a penthouse hidden behind a restaurant kitchen elevator, and owned on paper by a dead investment banker from Reno. Vegas loved secrets because secrets paid better than loyalty. By the time dawn reached the edge of the curtains, I had slept maybe 40 minutes on a couch while Frank went over security footage in the next room with Rosa and a man named Dominic Greco, who looked like he'd been born in a knife fight and raised on espresso. At 8, Frank finally came in alone. "You're coming with me," I pushed up on one elbow. "Where?" "Floor 19. Sleep vanished. The Aurelia." "Yes." I sat all the way up. After what happened last night, you want to go back? I want to know what's hidden in the room that got my sister killed and Adrian Vale stabbed. That answer shut down every argument before it formed. We went just before noon, while the hotel was busiest, and invisibility could hide inside spectacle. Frank wore charcoal today. I wore one of Rose's jackets, and a baseball cap pulled low. We entered through employee access with forged maintenance badges. If I hadn't watched the man carrying the badges at gunpoint over coffee, I might have been impressed by the efficiency of it. St. Aurelia's public floor maps ended at 18 and resumed at 20. Most guests never noticed. Most auditors didn't either, because hospitality software loves renumbering. That was how you hit a floor in plain sight. Call it a service gap, pad the building specs, and let everyone with money assume the architecture was merely weird. I would never again underestimate weird architecture. The service elevator opened to a raw corridor between two mechanical shafts, concrete, conduit, cold air, a place built to be forgotten. Frank moved slower here, cane absent, weight controlled and silent despite the size that made every rung a negotiation. In daylight, and without the suits and lobby choreography, I saw something I should have noticed before. He was not only big, he was careful, with every step, with every doorway, with every turn of his shoulders through narrow space. A man who had learned the world was built smaller than he needed it to be, and adapted without asking permission. We found the hidden door behind stacked linen cages. Magnetic lock. Legacy panel. Older than the current Aurelia system. I knelt to study the keypad while Frank kept watch down the corridor. You can open it? He asked. If the tech who installed it got lazy 15 years ago, yes. Did he? I ran my fingers along the casing, feeling for wear. All men get lazy when they believe no one is looking. Frank made a sound in his throat that might have been laughter. 30 seconds later, the panel clicked. The door swung inward. Room 1907 smelled like expensive carpet, stale cologne, and old smoke sealed into walls that had learned too much. It wasn't a hotel room anymore. It was a control box disguised as luxury. Hidden cameras recessed in crown molding, sound baffling behind velvet panels, server cabinet behind a false wardrobe, a private service lift masked as a mirror wall. The bed was gone. In its place stood a conference table, 4 leather chairs, monitors, and a bank of drives connected to local storage. Frank went very still behind me. On the far wall, half hidden by a slatted panel, was a scorch mark shaped like a hand dragged downward through smoke. Lucia. I didn't know that was what he was seeing until he said her name so quietly I almost missed it. The room shrank around the sound. Then he moved past me with that same absolute control he wore like tailored cloth. He touched nothing at first, just looked, cataloged, took in. I went straight for the server cabinet, 3 active arrays, off-network loop, local mirror. Someone wanted the room self-contained. That was smart. That was how you kept a blackmail suite alive even when hotel IT rolled over and changed vendors every 5 years. I plugged in my laptop. Frank said, "How long?" "If they haven't set a trigger on entry logs, 10 minutes. And if they have, then we've got 6. He nodded once like that was reasonable. I worked. File directories bloomed across screen, video logs, expense routing, VIP schedules, maintenance overrides, separate folders tagged with initials and dates stretching back 12 years. The older records had been scanned from handwritten ledgers, newer ones synced through Marino hospitality accounting architecture. I opened user permissions. My pulse jumped. 1 super admin. E. Marino. There it was. Not proof enough for court, maybe. More than enough for family. Frank saw the name reflected in the monitor. "Don't say it," he said. I didn't. Instead, I copied the admin log, the trafficking manifests, the insurance routing, the service elevator override history, and every file tagged 1907 onto Rose's encrypted drive clone. Then I hit something I almost missed, a subfolder under Lucia's fire report named Mother of Pearl. Inside was video, old, grainy, converted from analog security tape. The timestamp was the night Lucia died. I clicked it. The image shook once, then steadied on the old 1907 door. A teenage girl, Frank's sister, I guessed, from the shape of her face and the same hard line through the brow, arguing with a man half off camera. The audio was faint, but one word came through clean enough to raise the hair on my arms. Eddie. The man stepped fully into view. Older now, thinner then, same polished posture, same controlled face. Eddie Marino. He grabbed Lucia's arm. She shoved him back. Then 2 men in security uniforms appeared, and the footage stuttered hard, as if someone had damaged it deliberately. Next clear frame. Smoke under the door. Security logs overridden. Alarm delayed by 6 minutes. My breathing stopped. Frank did not. That was worse. He stood beside me, watching the tape with a stillness I had only seen once before. When Lucia's name first surfaced, I whispered, "He killed her." Frank's voice came low and flat. "He let her die." There are some angers too large for noise. This was one of them. My fingers were still on the keys when the hidden lift behind us chimed. Soft, mechanical, impossible to mistake. Frank moved before I could, one hand around my arm, one glance to the mirror panel lift. "Back," he said. We had 3 seconds. He shoved me behind the server cabinet just as the lift doors opened. 2 men stepped out first, both armed, then Eddie Marino. He was older than Frank by maybe 6 years, handsome in the way polished knives are handsome. Navy suit, silver tie, not a hair out of place. You could have put him in front of investors or bishops, and they would have seen discipline, class, control. You had to know where to look to see rot. He took 2 steps into 1907, saw the open cabinet, and stopped. No one spoke. Then one of the gunmen turned toward the server shadow where I was hidden. Frank stepped out before he could. Everything after that happened too fast for memory to sort properly. Eddie's surprise. The gunman's arm rising, Frank's shot breaking the room open, glass exploding from one of the monitors, me dropping instinctively to the floor, the second gunman firing wild, Frank moving with the kind of violence that didn't look theatrical because it was too efficient to be. He used the table for cover, not heroics, shot once, twice, first man down, second screaming, clutching a forearm gone red. Eddie ran for the lift. I saw it because I was on the floor, because fear had flattened me into the angle where strategy becomes obvious. I also saw the service control box half open beside the mirror panel. Without thinking, I lunged. My hand hit the emergency lock toggle just as Eddie reached the doors. The lift slammed shut between him and the corridor. He whirled. Our eyes met. He looked at me first with shock, then with something uglier, recognition. He knew who I was. Of course he did. "Mariam Qureshi," he said, almost laughing. "My brother's taste keeps surprising me." Frank's gun lifted. "Say one more word." Eddie looked from him to me and smiled the kind of smile men wear when they still believe blood will save them. "She's the auditor?" Frank said nothing. Eddie's smile sharpened. That lobby story was real then. Even through the terror, I understood something then. The attack on our suite, the room shortage, the surveillance. Eddie had been watching from the beginning. He knew exactly which sentence Frank had whispered in the lobby, because he had men on every camera worth buying. Frank took one slow step forward. "You used Lucia's room." Eddie's face didn't change. "I used an empty floor. You delayed the fire alarm." A beat. Then Eddie shrugged. Infinitesimal. Elegant. "She was emotional." Frank's hand tightened on the gun so hard I thought the metal might bend. I found my voice. "You've been moving women through this floor for 12 years. Eddie looked at me like he might finally be seeing more than a nuisance. "Do you know what I love about accountants?" he asked. "You think seeing the numbers makes you brave." "No," I said, and my own voice startled me with its steadiness. "I think men like you only exist because everyone else is afraid to read." Something flashed in his eyes. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation resetting under pressure. He shifted his weight. Frank saw it too late. Eddie wasn't reaching for the gun at his waist. He was reaching for the wall switch behind him. The room lights died. Emergency red kicked in. Then the fire doors began to close. He was sealing us inside 1907. I heard Frank swear once. Low and vicious, then felt his hand find my shoulder in the dark. "Stay behind me." No, the word left before I could judge it. I knew this room now, better than he did. I knew where the cabinet sat, where the false wardrobe opened, where the emergency service ladder connected behind the linen chase because I had seen it on the maintenance diagrams. I grabbed his sleeve in the dark and pulled. This way. He came, trusting me that fast. Should not have mattered. It did. We moved by red emergency light and gun smoke. Eddie fired once. The shot hit metal. Frank returned fire blind toward the sound, enough to drive him back. I found the wardrobe panel, opened it. Narrow shaft, fixed ladder. Frank looked from it to me. "You first. I'm not climbing with you under fire. You're climbing because I said so." I almost snapped back. Then another shot cracked, close enough that plaster burst against my hair. I climbed. The ladder was tight, cold, vertical. I heard Frank behind me, heavy and controlled despite the size that made every rung a negotiation. Eddie was shouting now, voice warped by concrete and fury. He couldn't follow us without abandoning the room, the evidence, the trapped exit he thought would save him. We emerged 2 floors up behind banquet storage, breathless and streaked with dust. Frank braced one hand on the wall, the other on his thigh, breathing hard now in a way he had kept hidden until the climb forced truth out of him. I turned. There was blood darkening his sleeve. A line high on his left arm. "Frank, not now. It's your arm. Mariam." The way he said my name stopped me. Not harsh, not soft, focused. Then he pushed off the wall and pulled his phone. "Rosa." A pause. 19. Eddie. "Armed. Send Dominic through service and shut the west elevators." "No, he knows the room's burned. Lock the exits anyway." He hung up and looked at me. You okay? I stared at him. We had just been trapped in a murder suite by his brother. He was bleeding through Italian cotton that probably cost more than my car. The city underneath us was still selling room service and poker dreams to people who had no idea how close they were to rot. And he was asking if I was okay. It hit me somewhere strange. Not like romance. Not yet. Like grief. Recognizing shelter. I'm fine, I said automatically. He gave me the driest look I had ever seen in my life. That line again. Something in me cracked just enough to let air through. I laughed. It came out ragged and wrong and too close to a sob. Frank stared for half a second, then shook his head, like he couldn't decide whether I was brave or unwell. Come on, he said. We're done being inside his walls. The next 48 hours changed everything. Rose's team raided the remaining server mirrors before Eddie could wipe them remotely. Dominic pulled one dirty state inspector out of a baccarat room and got enough from him to confirm what the ledgers already said. A federal contact Frank had been quietly feeding lesser names to for years suddenly found an appetite for a much bigger case once the trafficking manifests hit her desk. And Sammy, who had spent the first 24 hours convinced I had joined the devil, started answering Frank's calls like he was a surgeon, and not the reason every respectable auntie in our old neighborhood locked doors a little earlier. That change happened in the Belmare kitchen at 2 a.m. over tea, so strong it could have dissolved bone. Sammy had come up from our apartment after Rose's people moved him out of Spring Valley for safety. He arrived angry, defensive, and one panic attack away from swinging on the first armed man who looked at him too long. Frank came into the kitchen in his shirt sleeves, carrying ice on his arm, and then found my brother standing between me and the door like a badly paid bodyguard. This is stupid, Sammy said. We can go to the feds ourselves. Frank opened the freezer, replaced the melting ice pack, and said, No, you can't. Sammy bristled. And why not? Because the detective your sister would get assigned sold booking information to Eddie twice in the last 6 months. And because the agent above her likes accepting campaign donations routed through hotel development trusts. And because your name is already sitting on a shortlist labeled collateral. Sammy went very still. Frank shut the freezer and turned. I know you think I'm the worst man in the room, he said. You're entitled to that. But I'm the reason Miriam got out of that lobby alive and the reason you're drinking tea in my kitchen instead of waking up zip-tied in a trunk. Not my kitchen, I almost said. Then stopped, because somehow, in the days since the one-room night, he had been telling the truth in increments. He never said more than he meant. Sammy looked at me. I looked back. Then my younger brother, who had spent the last 8 years pretending he wasn't scared because one of us always had to act like rent and death were both survivable, lowered his voice and asked Frank, What do you need from us? Frank glanced at me before answering. Your sister, he said. You already gave me the thing that matters. Sammy frowned. What? The truth. It shouldn't have felt intimate. It did. That same night, after Sammy was asleep in the guest room, Rosa had swept twice and Dominic had mocked once. I found Frank on the terrace outside the Belmare suite. Vegas below us glowed like a lie refusing to die. Neon, sirens, helicopter sweep. The strip was always prettiest, when viewed from somewhere expensive, and high enough that you couldn't smell the desperation under it. Frank stood at the railing with one hand in his pocket and the other braced against stone. The city made his profile look sharper. Lonelier, I stepped out with 2 mugs of tea. He glanced over. Which one's mine? The one without honey. A flicker moved through his face. You remembered. You hate sweet things. I don't hate sweet things. You do when they're pretending to be something else. He took the mug from me. Our fingers touched. The contact was brief. It still went through me like the body keeps its own ledgers of danger and wanting, and doesn't always file them separately. He drank, winced almost imperceptibly when the heat hit. Your arm. It's fine. I leaned against the railing beside him. That line again. This time he smiled properly. It changed his whole face. Worse, it changed the air around me. I looked away first, toward the Belmare pool throwing blue light on empty deck chairs. Did you know about Lucia? I asked quietly. His smile vanished. No. You never checked the old fire records? I checked everything. He stared out at the city. The report was clean. Wiring failure, sprinkler malfunction. Lucia had been using pills. Half the city wanted to believe a damaged girl fell asleep smoking. I wanted proof. I never got it. I held my mug tighter. She called me that night, he said. The words came so evenly it took me a second to hear the fracture in them. I turned toward him. I was in a meeting, he went on. We were still clawing our way up then. My father was dead. Eddie handled hotel operations because he looked like trust in a suit, and I looked like the man who would break your hands if you lied to him. His jaw flexed. Lucia called twice. I silenced it twice. By the time I called back, the room was on fire. The city noise dimmed under the weight of that confession. She died in the only place on earth she thought was ours, he said. And I let another man teach me what her last 6 minutes cost. There wasn't a correct answer to that. So I told the truth. I'm sorry. He laughed once, without humor. That's the thing about sorry, Miriam. It doesn't reverse anything. It just proves you got there too late. I should have left him alone then. Instead, I said, you bought girls out of hotel books. He looked over, surprised. I read the older ledgers, I said. Not all the numbers under legacy were theft. Some were relocation costs, lawyers, tickets, medical bills. You've been buying people out of the same machinery that killed your sister. His face went still in a different way. You read too much. It's literally my profession. That's not what I meant. I took a breath. You built counters inside the rot. He looked back at the city. Not enough of them. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe the hour, maybe the tea, maybe the fact that grief feels different when it recognizes another grief and stops pretending one of them is cleaner. I set my mug down and touched his sleeve. Just once. Not his hand. Not his face. His sleeve. Enough to say I was there. Enough to stop myself if he wanted distance. Frank went very still under the contact. Then he turned toward me. I had seen his eyes cold, furious, calculating, watchful. I had never seen them unguarded. Now I did. Back in the lobby, I said softly, when you whispered that line, did you mean it? He looked at my hand on his sleeve, then at my face. In the lobby? He asked. Yes. I meant that if anyone in that building thought you were with me, they'd hesitate before grabbing you. That's not what I asked. His throat worked once. Then, very quietly, he said, in the lobby, I meant survive the night. The city wind moved my hair against my cheek. He did not lift a hand to tuck it back. He was too careful for that. And now? I asked. That was when the difference between a dangerous man and an honest one opened like a knife in the dark. Because Frank Marino could have lied. He could have said something beautiful, something strategic, something soft enough to carry me wherever he wanted. Instead, he said, now, I don't trust myself to answer. I stopped breathing for a second. Then, because honesty was contagious at 3 a.m, and because I had spent too much of my life being too practical for my own pulse, I said, that makes 2 of us. He looked at me for one long second. That felt like something tightening and giving way at the same time. Then he stepped back. Not rejection, restraint. And somehow that was worse. The next morning, Rosa walked into the breakfast room, took one look at both of us, and said, great. Feelings. Exactly what this needed. I nearly choked on coffee. Frank didn't blink. 3 hours later, Eddie moved again. He didn't come for me. He came for the evidence. A warehouse off Industrial Road went up at 11:12 a.m., not one of Frank's publicly known properties. A document storage facility owned by a shell under Marino Hospitality's acquisitions arm. We watched the smoke on television first, then on live drone feeds. Eddie wasn't just burning paper, he was burning chain of custody. Frank stood at the media wall with one hand braced against the console, breathing hard enough now that even someone untrained would notice. Rosa saw me noticing. He climbed too much too fast yesterday, she said under her breath. His knee and lung don't forgive drama. Lung, collapsed one in his 20s. She kept her eyes on the screen. Different war. The warehouse smoke thickened. Frank turned. Miriam, tell me what I'm missing. No one had ever asked me that in a room full of armed men and screens showing live arson. I stepped closer to the wall display. Eddie knows the copy from 19 exists, I said, but he still burned the warehouse. Because he wants you emotional. I glanced at Frank. And because the warehouse mattered less than the story of it. Rosa nodded once. Say the rest. He's cleaning narrative, not data. I looked back at the drone feed. He wants the city to think you're destroying your own house to frame him before regulators can prove anything. Frank's expression sharpened, which means he needs you to react in a way cameras understand. I exhaled. He's not done. He's hurting. The room went quiet. Dominic swore softly. Toward what? I thought of the one place where story, family, and public perception met. The Memorial Gala, I said. Frank's eyes cut to mine. St. Aurelia's Foundation was hosting its annual charity gala in 48 hours. Investors, city people, cameras. Eddie would be there publicly as benefactor. Frank was expected, but had not confirmed after the attack. He wants you either absent, I said. So he looks like the legitimate brother carrying the empire, or present and enraged. So you look unstable while he looks civilized. Rosa said, and the evidence? I thought of 1907, of the server cabinet, of old analog and new digital stitched together through control of hotel infrastructure. He'll move the final archive to the gala, I said. Somewhere hidden in plain sight. Somewhere crowded enough that no one notices equipment. Frank didn't speak for a full 5 seconds. Then he said, the wine vault. The Belmare breakfast room got colder. Dominic looked up sharply. Under the Aurelia ballroom? Frank nodded once. Of course, temperature-controlled, off public map, serviced by a restricted lift, shielded from outside signal drift by stone and steel. Perfect for a blackmail archive and last resort data cache. Rosa looked at me. All right, auditor. Now what? I set my coffee down. We let him think the story's working, I said. Frank skips the first public briefing. Eddie goes to the gala. I go with Frank anyway. Frank turned. No, I didn't even look at him. That wasn't a suggestion. His voice dropped. Miriam. Now I looked. No, I said, just as quietly. I'm the one Eddie underestimated in the lobby, in the room, in every file with my name not on it. He still thinks I'm a witness. He doesn't understand I know how he hides things. Frank's jaw tightened so hard I saw the muscle jump. He doesn't need to understand it, he said. He just needs a clean line to you, and I'm not giving him one. I took one step toward him. The line already exists. He went still, because we both knew it was true. It had existed from the moment his hand closed around mine, and the lobby cameras recorded a sentence neither of us had been able to leave behind since. Rosa broke the stare before it turned into whatever dangerous thing wanted to happen inside it. She's right, she said. He won't reveal the vault unless he thinks his audience is in the room. Frank looked like he wanted to fire her on principle. Dominic, annoyingly calm, added, and if you bench her now, boss, she stops trusting you and starts doing reckless things alone. I've seen smart women get there. It's ugly. I almost liked him for that. Frank rubbed once at the side of his neck below the tattoo. Then he looked at me with a kind of exhausted fury that felt more intimate than it should have. If you go, he said, you do exactly what I tell you when it counts. I held his gaze. If what you tell me doesn't get me killed. His mouth flattened. Christ. Rosa smiled into her coffee. Now it feels like family. The memorial gala dressed itself in grief and old money. That was the first thing I thought when I walked into the Aurelia ballroom 2 nights later, in a deep red gown Rosa had chosen, because if you're going to ruin a man, do it in silk. The second thing I thought was that Eddie Marino understood theater better than most killers. White orchids, string quartet, a display wall honoring St. Aurelia's historic legacy, a framed black and white photograph of Lucia at 19 with a caption about cherished memory and charitable mission, city cameras, investors, foundation donors, a state senator smiling beside a portrait of the dead girl whose murder he helped bury. Vegas never lacked for audacity. Frank arrived 11 minutes after me because timing mattered when every eye in the room had an agenda. He wore black again. No tie, open collar, tattoo at the neck just visible. The image of the dangerous brother Eddie had spent a decade making useful. The room shifted when he entered. Not silence. Worse, interest. Eddie saw it. Saw me near the display wall. Saw Frank's gaze go to me before anything else. Saw every investor and camera catch that glance. I think that was the moment he understood something he had failed to price correctly. Not that Frank would protect me, that Frank had stopped treating that protection like strategy. Eddie crossed the floor with donor charm all over him. Miriam, he said warmly, as if he weren't the reason Adrian Vale bled out against tile. I'm glad you're safe. I looked him in the eye. I'm not, I said. The warmth thinned. Frank joined us 1 heartbeat later. Eddie smiled at his brother. You made it. You sound disappointed. Only surprised. Frank's gaze flicked once toward Lucia's memorial photo. You always did know how to decorate over a crime scene. Eddie's expression barely moved. Careful. You first. No one around us understood the full exchange. That was the genius of men raised in the same rot. They could threaten in grammar while everyone else heard manners. A server passed with champagne. I took 1 glass just to have something to do with my hand. Frank's fingers brushed the base of my spine as he guided me half a step behind his shoulder. The move was subtle enough to read as intimacy to outsiders. To me, it read as math. Protect the line of sight, block the body, change the angle of attack. But his hand stayed a fraction too long. Just enough for both of us to notice. Eddie's eyes dropped to that hand, then lifted again. Interesting, they said without him having to. Music swelled. Donors began moving toward the silent auction displays. Rosa's voice came through the tiny earpiece I had finally surrendered to because even my stubbornness had limits. West Hall clear. Service lift locked. Dominic in position. Miriam, you're going to need an excuse to break toward the cellar access. I looked at the display boards. Old Aurelia wine heritage. Private reserve auction at midnight for top-tier donors. Of course. I turned slightly toward Eddie and let the fury I already felt do the work. This gala is disgusting. Eddie smiled politely for nearby ears. I'm sorry you feel that way. You turned your sister into decor. That got us a few looks. Good. I stepped closer like emotion had overridden caution. It had, just not in the way anyone here thought. You put her face on walls, I said, voice rising exactly enough, while the room she died in stays hidden like a secret worth keeping. Frank said my name low, warning-like. For the room. For the cameras. For whoever needed to think he was managing me. Eddie's mask held, but barely. Miriam, he said. This isn't the place. No, I said. The place is downstairs, isn't it? There it was. A flicker. Tiny. Automatic. He looked toward the west corridor for less than half a second. Enough. Rosa's voice hit my ear instantly. Got it. Frank took my elbow. For the room again. For me, also maybe. We're done. I turned as if furious. Eddie leaned in close enough for only us to hear. You have no idea what kind of man you're standing beside. I looked at him and felt something cold settle perfectly into place. No, I said, but I know exactly what kind of man I'm standing in front of. Then Frank was steering me away, fast. The moment we cleared the ballroom threshold, the choreography died. We moved. Rosa came from the opposite corridor with Dominic, and two fed-looking men in plain tuxes, whose eyes gave them away. Frank didn't break stride. Vault, already opening, Rosa said. We hit the service lift in a dead run of expensive shoes and controlled panic. Frank lagged by maybe half a step. Old pain, breath. I registered it. He registered me registering it, and gave me a look that said later if ever. The lift descended. No one spoke. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The vault beneath the Aurelia ballroom wasn't a vault in the cinematic sense. It was a long stone cellar converted into reserve storage. Wine cages, cooling systems, service terminals, a silent alarm panel, and one section at the far end built newer than the rest. Steel door, digital lock, hidden in plain sight behind a wall of Brunello. Rosa swore softly. Cute. Frank stepped up to the panel. I caught his wrist. Wait. He looked at my hand, then at me. What? If Eddie built this into the gala route, he built a dead man into it too. His expression sharpened. Trap. Dominic took over. Fiber optic camera under door gap. Signal jammer. Quick scan of hinges and latch seams. 30 seconds later, he said, pressure wire on the inside. We open direct. Something blows. The Fed on the right murmured, "Can you bypass?" Dominic grimaced. Maybe. I stared at the old service terminal on the side wall. Maybe you don't have to. Everyone looked at me. I moved to the terminal. Old Aurelia cellar systems ran on a parallel control network from before the Marino renovation. They still linked temperature alarms, sommelier access, private reserve logs, and suppression foam deployment. No one modernized wine security unless bottles were worth more than people. Vegas in a sentence. I keyed in the override path from the legacy diagrams I had seen in the 1907 files. Rosa caught on first. You're going to trip the vault as environmental hazard. I nodded. If pressure wire is tied to unauthorized entry, authorized emergency release should drop the latch without arming the failsafe. Frank watched my hands. If you're wrong, I didn't look up. Then we all become a story by midnight. His silence said go. I entered the final string. For 1/6 second, nothing happened. Then the vault hissed. Latch released. No blast. Dominic opened it carefully. Inside sat rows of climate cabinets and 3 metal trunks. Hard drives. Original ledgers, passport folders, cameras, enough blackmail to buy or bury half Nevada, and sitting on the center trunk like a man who had expected us all along, Eddie, gun in hand. I didn't understand how he had beaten us there until I saw the second lift door behind him, hidden in the stone wall. Private route, of course. He smiled without warmth. I was wondering when you'd stop pretending numbers were the whole story. Everything narrowed. The feds raised weapons. Eddie laughed. You won't shoot, he said, not with the drives behind me. Frank stepped forward slightly, putting himself between Eddie's line of fire and me before I could even resent it. Put it down. Or what? Eddie's gaze slid past him to me. You finally teach your auditor what belonging costs. Frank's voice dropped. You say her name again. You lose the mouth that formed it. The room went very still. Eddie's smile sharpened. There he is. I saw it then. His stance. Not toward Frank. Toward the far trunk. There was a trigger in his free hand. Small. Thumb-sized. Hidden by the vault lights and his own arrogance. He wasn't here to escape. He was here to erase. The evidence. Himself if necessary. Us too. He would burn his own archive before he let Frank or the feds have it. I moved before the thought finished. Later, I would tell myself it was strategy. That I saw angle and timing, and the fact that everyone else in the vault was too fixed on the gun to clock the thumb trigger. That was only half true. The other half was simpler. I was tired of men deciding what could be destroyed if it protected them. I took the champagne bottle from the side service cradle and hurled it, not at Eddie's gun hand, at the climate cabinet above his shoulder. Glass exploded. Red wine rained down. Alarms screamed instantly as coolant systems failed and emergency foam jets primed. Eddie flinched. Frank fired. The shot took Eddie high in the shoulder and spun him back into the center trunk. The thumb trigger flew. Dominic lunged. One Fed kicked the weapon away. Everything after that happened inside a white blast of suppression foam and shouting. The vault filled with choking chemical haze. I heard Rosa swearing, heard metal crash, heard Eddie make a sound like rage tearing in half. Then a second gunshot cracked too close. Pain hit Frank's side. Not dramatic, not a body drop, just a brutal stumble and a hand clamping hard over darkening fabric. My whole body went cold. Frank. He looked at me through haze and noise, furious not at the wound but at my voice using his name like that. Stay back. Absolutely not. I moved anyway. Rosa and the feds had Eddie down now. Dominic on the trigger hand, blood and foam turning the stone floor into something ugly and slippery. The archive trunks were intact. One cabinet burned out, but not the core evidence. Frank was trying to stay upright. Trying. That terrified me more than if he'd fallen. I got my shoulder under his arm before he could argue. He was heavier than I expected, and steadier than he should have been, which told me how practiced he was at pretending damage didn't count. Miriam, shut up. I'm not dying in a wine cellar. Then stop leaning like you want to prove a point. Something like a laugh almost broke through his teeth. Bossy. Bleeding men don't get adjectives. We got him into the corridor while medics already pushed past us. Rosa stayed back with the evidence, Dominic with Eddie. The Fed on the left yelled for chain of custody seals. The Empire was breaking open around us. All I could see was blood slipping between Frank's fingers. The medical suite upstairs belonged to the Aurelia's VIP health wing. Vegas did not enjoy ambulances in front of donors if it could help it. A doctor cut Frank's shirt. Stitched, pressured, injected, wrapped. The bullet had gone through soft tissue and missed anything that would end the story tonight. I stood at the far wall with my hands clenched so hard my nails marked my palms. When the doctor left, Frank was propped half upright in a recovery chair because apparently even injured he had opinions about beds. I stared at the bandage crossing his side, the tattoo on his chest, partially exposed beneath open fabric, the exhaustion he was too worn down now to fully hide. He looked up. "You're bleeding." I blinked. "What?" He lifted his chin toward my forearm, a long, shallow line of glass and vault chaos. Barely felt. I laughed once, hollow with the leftover terror. "That's your concern. It's on your arm. You were shot." He gave me a look. "Technically grazed. Do men like you come with a handbook, or does the stupidity self-generate?" That finally got a real smile. Small, pained, worth too much. Then it faded. He looked at me for a long moment. "You moved." "What?" "In the vault." I folded my arms because suddenly standing felt too exposed. "You sound surprised." "I told you to stay back." "I'm aware." His eyes stayed on mine. "You didn't." "No." "Why?" The room got very quiet. Not because I didn't know. Because I did. Because saying it would change shape if I put words around it. I looked at the strip through the private health suite windows. Sun was setting, turning the city gold in the most dishonest way. "Because," I said finally, "I have watched men like Eddie destroy rooms, records, women, families, and then call it business." I swallowed once. "And because I couldn't stand there and watch him take one more thing from you." The words hung between us. Frank's face changed so slightly another person might have missed it. I didn't. He looked away first. That was how I knew it mattered. A soft knock sounded on the suite door. Rosa entered with a federal agent, a stack of folders, and the exhausted satisfaction of someone who had finally dragged rot into daylight. "Eddie's in custody," she said. "State senator too. Gaming board inspector, 3 hotel executives." The vault gave enough to make the feds weep with gratitude. Dominic leaned in behind her. "Also, the Bellmare wants their towels back." Frank didn't even look at him. "Buy them." "Already did." Rosa handed me one of the folders. Inside were release notices, protection arrangements, and witness terms. At the bottom sat a clean document transferring a controlling anti-fraud role within Marino Hospitality to an independent oversight office. My name was on the draft. I looked up sharply. Frank said, "No one else should rebuild a system you already know how to read," Rosa added. "And before you ask, it comes with salary high enough to offend your pride." I stared at the page. After all of it, blood, rooms, fires, dead auditors, Eddie, Lucia, the lobby line that had rewritten the direction of my week, Frank Marino was offering me work. Not protection disguised as possession. Work, choice, a future with actual math in it. I looked at him. "This is a bribe. A good one. It's bribing me into staying." He was quiet a moment. Then, "No." The single syllable held more honesty than most men managed with paragraphs. Rosa and Dominic, to their credit, both found reasons to leave at exactly that moment. The room closed around just the two of us again. Frank waited until the door clicked. Then he said, "It's paying you to build something no one can hide women inside again." I looked down at the papers, then back at him. "And if I don't take it, you don't. And if I walk," his gaze held mine without trying to persuade, "then you walk." It should have been enough. It was almost enough. I crossed the room slowly, stopping at the side of his chair. He looked up at me with the open fatigue of a man who had finally won the war he wanted least. "There's something I need to ask," I said. "All right. That night in the lobby, if there had been 10 rooms left, would you still have taken my hand?" He went very still. The answer mattered too much. I hated that. Kept hating it. Couldn't stop. Finally he said, "Yes." My breath caught. "Why?" His eyes dropped once to my mouth, then came back to my face, steady and unflinching. "Because when Adrian handed you the drive, you didn't run the way most people run." His voice stayed low. "You calculated, you looked for exits, then you came to me anyway." A beat, And because I knew, the second I saw you in that lobby, that if I let anyone else touch your life before I understood why you mattered, I'd regret it for a very long time. The room tilted, only slightly. That's not strategy, I whispered. No, what is it? He answered without moving, without reaching, without making it easy on either of us. You tell me. I should have made him work harder. I should have protected myself one last time. Instead, I reached up and touched the cut on his cheek with 2 fingers, featherlight. His eyes closed for half a second. When they opened, all the careful distance between us felt like a thing already losing. I hated that sentence, I said softly. What sentence? You belong beside me tonight. His mouth moved, humor and something rougher together. I figured. I thought it was possession. It was cover. I know. Silence. Then quieter, because truth changes tone when it gets close enough to hurt. I said, but somewhere after the blood, and the room, and the vault, it stopped feeling like a lie. Frank looked at me like a man who had built entire cities inside restraint, and could feel a crack running through the foundation. Miriam, just my name. It did worse things to me than seduction would have. I leaned in because he was injured, and I could blame concern if I lost my nerve. He met me halfway because Frank Marino had never once taken what wasn't moving toward him too. The kiss was brief, not because it lacked anything, because it held too much. Heat, relief, terror, restraint sharpened into honesty. His hand came to my waist, careful of its own strength, careful of me, like the whole city could wait another minute if he held still enough to be sure I was real. When we broke apart, the strip was still burning gold behind the glass. Nothing in Vegas had slowed down for us, and yet the room had. What happens now? I asked. Frank's forehead rested lightly against mine for one dangerous second before he drew back. Now, he said, voice rough, you decide whether the job is worth taking. I laughed softly despite myself. That's your answer. It's the one that matters. It took 3 weeks for the public story to settle, and 6 for the real one to begin. Eddie was indicted. The senator resigned before charges landed. St. Aurelia's hidden 19th floor became the most expensive legal problem in Nevada. 3 newspapers won awards. Rosa stopped sleeping entirely. Dominic started pretending federal agents were now his closest friends. Sammy passed his term finals out of pure spite and kept texting Frank terrible memes he pretended not to understand. And I took the job. Not because of the kiss, not because of the blood, not because the one-room night had rewritten something in me I was still learning to live inside. I took it because ghosts like 1907 only survive when smart people walk away from the work of dragging them open. So I stayed. Not in Frank's penthouse, not immediately. He offered a secure apartment with its own keycard, its own exit routes, its own view of the strip. It came with none of the pressure that old stories usually expect from powerful men, and injured tenderness. He didn't assume. He never once asked me to move back into his rooms. He just kept showing up. Coffee left at my office before 7. Dinner sent when I forgot to eat during reconciliation reviews. A text once, only once, after a late hearing ran long. Did you get home? I stared at that text for 2 minutes before answering yes. His reply came immediately. Good, that was it. No demand. No performance. Just the most dangerous man in my city making space around a woman who still woke sometimes hearing a lobby clerk say there was only 1 room left in Las Vegas. The first time I went to his home by choice, it wasn't dramatic. It was a Sunday. Hot enough outside to turn the sidewalks bright with mirage and bad decisions. Frank had asked if I wanted to see the house outside the city. House, he'd said, as if the word could cover a private compound tucked above Red Rock with desert on one side, and a view of the whole valley on the other. It wasn't marble and menace. It was quiet. A courtyard, citrus trees, a library bigger than my old middle school, a kitchen that looked used, and on the back terrace, under shade cloth and clean desert light, a wooden table set for lunch. Just lunch. That unnerved me more than any theatrics ever could have. Frank walked slower at home. Not performative, not lazy, simply with less need to prove his body could outrun what hurt inside it. There was honesty in that too. We ate grilled lamb, tomatoes, flatbread, and fruit so cold it sweated in the heat. We talked about nothing that could explode. Sammy's clinical rotation, Rosa's terrible mood, the inspector I had just fired for falsifying panic button maintenance. Then, because peace apparently terrifies the human nervous system more than crisis when you've lived in it long enough, I asked, "Did you ever think I'd take the job?" Frank took a sip of water before answering. Yes. The certainty in it should have annoyed me. Instead, I asked, "Why?" "Because you were angry before you were scared." I laughed once. That's not flattering. It isn't meant to be. It's accurate. His gaze held mine. Scared people survive. Angry people change systems. The desert wind moved softly through the citrus leaves. I looked out across the valley, at a city built on spectacle, and still somehow filled with rooms no one bothered to count until women went missing inside them. I almost left, I said. I know. That surprised me enough to turn back. You do? He nodded once. You came to the Belmare apartment the night after you signed the contract. You stood in the doorway for 20 seconds too long. You had your bag on your shoulder. If I'd said one wrong thing, you would have gone. I thought back. He was right. I had come to tell him I couldn't do it, that the job was too tangled, that the city was too loud with his name in it, that wanting him made every risk harder to sort. Instead, he had taken one look at my face and said, "There's food in the kitchen if you haven't eaten." No speech, no reach, no pressure, just space. You knew, I said softly. Yes, and you let me stay silent. I figured if you wanted to leave, you needed dignity more than argument. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had held blood towels and audit files and broken bottle glass, and his sleeve on the terrace. He had never once tried to own them. Maybe that was the whole point. Frank. Yeah, what if I had left? His expression didn't change. Then I would have made sure nobody touched your life for the rest of it. The words should have felt like a threat. They didn't, just like the first line in the lobby. Everything with him had changed shape once truth got inside it. I stood and crossed to where he sat, because apparently I was done pretending distance still solved anything. He leaned back slightly to look up at me. I touched the scar by his jaw first, then the floral ink at his neck, tracing nothing fully, only enough to feel his skin warm under my fingers. I hated you a little that first night, I admitted. One room, one hotel. One mafia boss making choices with my body still attached to me. His mouth curved. Fair. I thought you were deciding where I belonged. His gaze darkened, but not with offense. With killers in the lobby, he said quietly. I was. I took a breath. And now, there it was again. That old cliff-edge question now stripped clean of fear and left with only risk. He didn't dodge it. Now, he said, I think belonging is too important a word to assign for someone else. The answer hit harder than anything sweeter could have, because it left the choice exactly where he always said it was. In my hands, so I used them. I leaned down and kissed him like a woman done surviving rooms that other men designed for her, like a woman who had been claimed publicly once for safety and was now choosing, without pressure, without spectators, without one thing borrowed from fear, to stay where her own body moved easiest. His hand came to my waist again, careful and certain. The desert beyond the terrace hummed with afternoon heat. Somewhere inside the house, a clock marked a life ordinary enough to be shocking. When I drew back, his eyes stayed on me. No performance, no disbelief, just the kind of attention that made everything else irrelevant without making me smaller inside it. You know, I said softly. That line in the lobby still pisses me off. A real laugh broke out of him that time, low and brief and worth all the bad decisions it caused in me. I know. It sounded like possession. It sounded like survival. It sounded like both. He nodded. Maybe. I studied him for a long moment. Then I said the truest thing I had. That night, I thought you were using your name to put me in the last safe room in the city. I touched his hand where it rested against the table between us. I didn't realize you were making space beside you and waiting to see if I would ever choose it on purpose. Frank's thumb turned under mine. Slow and warm. I was, he said. I smiled then, not because the danger was over. Vegas would never be over danger. Men would keep building hidden floors. Auditors would keep finding ghosts. Power would keep learning new disguises. I smiled because I finally knew the difference between being cornered into a room and walking willingly into one. The whole city had told the story wrong from the first night. They said only one room was left. The mafia boss took her hand, and by morning, she belonged to him. They were half right. Only one room was left. Frank Marino did take my hand, and by morning, something had changed. But it wasn't ownership. It was this. In a city built on false lights and disappearing girls and rooms that lied about what they contained, the most dangerous man in Las Vegas looked at me, saw a witness instead of a weakness, and made sure I lived long enough to become something no one could hide again. The first night, he whispered that I belonged beside him because it kept me alive. Everything after that was my choice, and that was why, in the end, I stayed.